Alright again, friends, welcome back to another episode of Tactical Enlightenment. This series is dedicated to helping players get better at Bannerlord through the use of advanced tactics. And we have another one of our custom battles today, but we're going to make an exception and a little change to these, basically modifying how I use each kingdom to give them very similar army strength. In fact, we're seriously outnumbered, but this would simulate effectively how I would play Vlandia if I was playing in a long campaign. I would be leaning heavily on certain units and certain cultures. And in this example here, what we're going to be doing is leaning heavily on their outstanding crossbow. I've got a nasty tactic that I've been working on and developed that utilizes their powerful crossbows. And of course, the fact that they have these incredible shields. So you see in the battle screen here, what we've done is we've overloaded our side with crossbows. We're playing against Battania, and of course, they're no slouches when it comes to archers. But in this situation, we're going to show you the strengths of Vlandian crossbowmen if they're used correctly. So what I've done, of course, is each side has one of the mercenary lines. They heavily outnumber us. They have plenty of archers too, but we have more archers, more crossbow. We're going to play in this sort of open field here. We've got a little bit of a terrain advantage, and then I'll run a second battle where they start with the terrain advantage. In other words, they're uphill. So we're going to effectively use this terrain, but critically we're going to divide our crossbow into 3 different divisions. As you'll see, one of my divisions though is going to be just our nastiest crossbow, and the idea behind that is that they're going to be both a defensive line and a powerful initial damage surge against the enemy. So dividing the army groups as usual. The second cav I typically use as an attacking cav. The 7th cav is typically a blocking cav, a defensive cav, and we're also going to use the 3rd cav as a defensive blocking cav. All right, so I have 3 cav divisions, as you can notice, and then I'm also running effectively a pike division as the 6th division. So we're going to have 3 different archery divisions, the 4th, 8th, and 5th. And you'll notice one thing I'm doing here with the 5th, what I'm doing is I'm overloading it with only the best quality crossbow, right? So the 4th in these series of Vlandia custom battles is going to be the linchpin. You can see all these guys are elite. All those are their sharpshooters and high-end crossbow. And what we're going to effectively try to do is use them very early in the battle to attack the enemy, putting them way out in front of the battle, with the idea being we want those guys to do as much damage as possible. They will eventually run out of bolts, but then we will have a secondary use for them, as you shall see. So the rest of the setup is fairly similar to how I set up my divisions. I'm going to definitely set up my other crossbow divisions behind a strong infantry line. Now I've also got my pikes behind the infantry line as well. And pikes for Vlandia includes, I think it's a French word, I believe. It's a volgier. It's basically a guy with a big long pole sword. What I want is I want him behind the main vanguard of shields, right? You want to protect your shock troops. So in the back, of course, is the 5th and 8th. That's crossbowmen. And then we're going to use our cav wings, the 3rd and the 7th, as defensive lines. Finally, of course, the 2nd cav, that's the heavy horse. We're going to have them following me a lot of the battle. We'll be using them to counter enemy charges and, of course, to puncture the enemy if necessary. Puncture by, I mean, attack, right? If you haven't watched my series, I use cavalry in 2 different ways. I use them as defensive lines to limit the opponent cav charge, but I will also use them, basically as screens, basically holding back enemy cav, absorbing arrows. So you can see we're seriously outnumbered here against Battania. And again, Battania has very good archers as well. A lot of people think that they're overpowered. They have the Battanian Fiend champions. In fact, the whole line of archers for Battania is their noble line. They all get 2 quivers of arrows too. So that's another critical thing to consider when you're playing against Battania. If you're going to win a ranged battle, it's not going to be through attrition. They're going to be shooting arrows way after your guys are out of ammunition. That's very important to consider. So I'm just using my 2nd to sort of counter their cav here. I told you I was going to do that. They're basically just trying to stop the enemy cav from charging in and really disrupting my tactic here. So the 4th crossbow are in front, and they're already raining death, right? These guys, it's the best crossbowmen in my army at this stage. There's about 100 guys. And you can see they're being very aggressive out in the front. All I'm trying to do is effectively counter these cavalry charges from the enemy and keep these Vlandia sharpshooters, and I think it's called a hardened crossbowman, towards the front, dealing damage as fast as they can early on in this battle. And you can see they're getting a lot of death span, right? Sharpshooter killed Chosen Wolf, sharpshooter hardened, Vlandian crossbowman killed so-and-so. Now what we're going to do with them after they're out of ammunition, and they will run out of ammunition because we put them towards the front. They've been shooting the whole time. Crossbowmen typically have a little longer range than troops with a bow and arrow. We're going to use them as a defensive square and put them basically right in the face of the enemy as they approach with their infantry. Right, that'll be additionally effective as well. Now you see here on this bank, I'm just utilizing the terrain. Of course, you should always utilize the terrain. That's my 8th crossbowman. All right, so here come the enemy infantry. All right, we're going to counter that. So we're pulling our units back here a bit. And as soon as we can, the 4th are told to move into a square. Now the enemy's going to be perplexed by this, right? Suddenly there's these archers they were charging. Now they're in a big square. I've got infantry behind them, and they're still getting rain death on both sides. I've got 2 different crossbow corps that are probably not out of arrows. Now we send in the 1st and the 6th pike. The 6th pikes are the Volgiers and the other pikemen. They are protected by the main infantry vanguard. Meanwhile, our cavalry is countering their cav. Our crossbowmen on both flanks are raining death, and the enemy is probably confused and attacking this square in the middle there. It's a square of these hardened crossbowmen and sharpshooters in a big defensive knot with their huge pavis shields, and the enemy doesn't know what to do, right? They're basically fucked. If they make a frontal attack, it's not going to be able to penetrate the shield. If they don't attack it, of course, well, with them, they go by it and try to get to the rest of our troops. All we have to do is just bring those guys out of shield and then pursue the enemy on the other side, right? And you can see how effective this was. Now, admittedly, this was downhill. Like, we're shooting downhill with elevation. Ask Anakin from Star Wars about attacking somebody with the high ground, right? You always want to use the high ground, but ultimately you see this was a massacre. So we'll run this battle again. I do understand that terrain has a significant advantage. We will run this another time with Battania uphill. All right, ready for round 2 now. This time we're going to make Battania the defender. You can see we've changed it to attacking. We are now attacking an army that's much larger than ours, 140 units more than us, and we have to attack, right? Theoretically, Battania should just completely mop us up in this scenario. But as you can see, we're going to basically try to maneuver the enemy so that they don't have the high ground. Now, a real human opponent would be much harder to maneuver and make it difficult for them to have the high ground. But until we're fighting human opponents, I'm showing you how to defeat your opposition, right? So very similar setup as before. We're going to have 3 different crossbow lines. And this is a strategy I think that anybody watching this video, once they study it and practice it a few times, should be able to deploy themselves. It's not an incredibly difficult tactic, although I admit using 8 divisions in combat, in field command, keeping track of what's going on is not easy. Practice makes perfect. You should be practicing the game of life, right? Trying to improve yourself, and practicing Bannerlord will also make you a superior field commander. So same setup as before. Our 1st infantry is our vanguard. Our 4th is going to be basically, if you want to consider it, it's our vanguard crossbowman. Right, now how do I change that? I go into the settings for the crossbowman. I want about 80 to 100 guys. I lock it off, and you change it to heavy armor and preference for elite troops. And what that'll do is that'll divide your army and put only your most elite crossbowmen in that corps. And that's critical because not all Vlandian crossbowmen get shields. So you have to have shields. Those guys preferably have the biggest shields. They're big pavis shields. It's the kind of thing it looks like they're just holding a fucking garage door. And they, not only are they highly protected from archery, but they're very protected from infantry attacks as well. That's the linchpin to this strategy. All right, so you see the enemy's setting up, up in a defensive, not uphill. Very smart of them. But we're just simply going to flank and overwhelm their current setup. Again, we're heavily outnumbered, right? Both sides theoretically have equal quality troops. They probably have 20 or 30 Battanian Fiend champs and a bunch of other lower noble line. You can see how strong their line is right now. If we made a frontal attack, we would get massacred. Even if we were even numbers, we would probably still lose. You can see how many troops they have, right? They have 100, I think it's 130 or 140 more troops than us. But all we're going to do is basically work our position here to a flank and try to get an angle on them where if we're not at least shooting downhill, we've got a little bit of an angle where we can shoot it at a similar elevation distance right now. One of the critical things if you're maneuvering like this is to move slowly. I'm kind of assigning my units to move on this left flank slowly. Little baby steps we're going to advance, right? Because if you make a big long sweeping turn on these guys, they'll be running at an angle across the battlefield, and they'll be within range of their arrows, right? You don't want that to happen. So we're kind of skirting the edge of the battlefield here. Battania is trying to make adjustments to their tactic, right? Because they're being flanked. But unfortunately, the AI is not brilliant enough to take an even higher ground position and just keep backing up on the map. If that was a human opponent of considerable intellect, I would suspect that they would back up and go up even higher on that hill. But unfortunately, it's not ChatGPT we're dealing with here. Now, it's a little bit complicated, but what I've done is I've assigned my units to basically hold that higher hill up there. And just like that, we've now maneuvered the enemy so that at least they're at even elevation. In fact, a lot of their guys are kind of lower elevation than us. Not only that, but they've changed their tactic. They have now switched into a circle, which I find to be disastrous. Now, their archers are spread beautifully. They're raining death on us, but we can now rain on them as well. So you see I have our elite crossbowmen way up on the hill there. And what I'm going to do is just like before, I'm going to spread crossbow divisions, the 5th and the 8th on both wings, right? We're going to stick to 8th way over here on this right flank, our right flank. And then on the left flank, we will put another crossbow division. In the front, we've got our vanguard right there, absorbing arrows, right? They're going to get some death. They're definitely absorbing the brunt of the Battanian attack, and again, we're hugely outnumbered. Meanwhile, over here, the 8th crossbowmen, you know, those guys are shooting, if not downhill, they're flanking the enemy somewhat, right? So they're dealing some damage. You see me moving my cap screen up. Those guys, there's only like 10 guys, but what it does is it distracts the enemy, right? It takes away from their attack. The cap doesn't just get to barrel through. Up on this hill. Now, ordinarily, in a flat battle, I would use the 4th crossbowman at the front of our battle here. But because there's this beautiful steep hill, I want them way up on this hill to expend their crossbow bolts shooting downhill. Now, the enemy's already charging us. Right? This is, again, it's sort of a tactical error, but the enemy put itself in that bad spot in the first place. On the flank, on the left flank over there, we're taking a cavalry charge. That's okay. Right? You're not going to have a perfect battle in this situation where you're outnumbered so heavily. I'm backing up the 1st infantry and turning them. Right? Both flanks, basically, I'm opening up because I want this Battanian main vanguard to come right at us. And what we're basically doing now is flanking the enemy. Right? They charged in to the sides. In come our 1st and 6th, the Volsiers. And at this stage, I don't even need to do any additional tactics with these crossbows. They're uphill, they're in a beautiful position, but we'll send them into melee as well. They get sent in shield wall and told to charge. Right? They're almost immune in shield wall like that to enemy arrows, and they're not bad at melee. If you've fought against sharpshooters, you know they're hassling. They've got a decent weapon, and of course that powerful shield. They will block your attacks over and fucking over again. So meanwhile, the 2 different flanks of crossbowmen are at least shooting down on the enemy. And critically, they're giving them what's called enfilade fire. They are shooting the enemy from the sides. Meanwhile, of course, our main front attack there is very strong. Right? We have our infantry division of about 90 guys. The pikes are right behind them. And then this very powerful crossbowmen are charging with their shields as well. And of course, the whole time, the 2nd Cavalry, I'm sort of dragging around these elite Bannerlords, etc. And look, the enemy just dissolved. Right? Their forces are gone. Their strategy failed. They didn't take a good high ground position, and we are hugely victorious, even though we're highly outnumbered here. So I'll be continuing to advance tactics with Vlandia and with other kingdoms as I think about how to use these different kingdoms, and we'll continue to try to get better and help you get better at Bannerlord. Thanks for watching, friends, and I'll see you fellas next time.